All right, forget the boring dates and dusty old textbooks. Today's explainer is all about a real-life historical conflict that honestly plays out exactly like a blockbuster action movie. We're talking about the 7 Years' War. Get ready, because we've got surprise attacks, impossible cliff climbs, and epic standoffs coming right up.
When we look at modern North America today, it's super easy to just assume the British were always destined to win, right? Like it was a sure thing. But when a war actually breaks out, the ending is never certain. And for a really long time, it looked like this story was going to have a completely different ending. Part 1, Two Empires, One Continent. So let's set the stage. We've got two massive empires fighting for control over one giant continent, but they have completely different goals. Check this out. France was mostly focused on fighting over in Europe and protecting their super profitable sugar trade. They basically just left their North American colonists to fend for themselves. But Britain? They had a totally different idea. They firmly believed the absolute best way to defeat France was to aggressively conquer North America. Part 2. Different ways to fight. Let's see exactly how these totally opposite goals led to completely different battle strategies. The British fought exactly the way they always did back in Europe. Picture this, marching head-on, in neat, perfect red lines right across open fields. To them, this was the only honorable way to fight. But the French and their First Nations allies, they used the chaotic woods to their advantage. No neat lines for them. They hid, they moved fast, and they completely used the environment. This is a strategy called guerrilla warfare. Instead of huge armies just marching slowly across a field, small, lightning-fast groups would carry out surprise attacks. And against those slow, brightly dressed British soldiers, well, these sneak attacks were absolutely devastating. Part 3. The First Nations alliances. Now, the French couldn't pull these tactics off alone. Their absolute key to surviving early on was their deep partnership with First Nations warriors. This was a relationship built entirely on mutual survival. For example, the Ojibwe allied with the French so they could get access to European trade goods. The French would exchange gifts, like tools and clothing, as really important symbols of respect. And in return, over 1,000 Ojibwe warriors stepped up and helped the French win some huge early victories. Actually, just listen to this first-hand account from none other than British commander George Washington. He describes a battle where his massive force of 1,300 well-armed troops was totally crushed by a group of French and First Nations warriors that was no larger than 300 men. The traditional British tactics were literally failing right in front of them. Part 4, Britain changes the game. Okay, so things started out really terribly for the British, but around 1757, they decided to completely rewrite their playbook. Britain basically opened up its wallet. They poured massive funding into the war and sent a whopping 20,000 extra soldiers all the way across the ocean. Their new goal was crystal clear: overwhelm the enemy with massive numbers and capture those French forts, one by one. Meanwhile, over on the French side, the army gets a brand new leader, Lieutenant General Louis Joseph de Montcalm. Now, he was a super experienced commander, but he only knew those traditional European-style tactics. So when he arrived, he was completely horrified by the messy, guerrilla fighting style of his own side. Despite Montcalm showing up, the British were seriously building momentum, and their ultimate target? Québec City. This was the strategic heart of New France. Even more importantly, it was a stronghold, a heavily fortified city sitting super high up on a cliff that made it incredibly difficult to attack. Part 5, The Surprise at Quebec. And that brings us right to the dramatic climax of our story in the summer of 1759. The British commander, General James Wolfe, had been trying to attack this walled city all summer long, but he kept failing. He needed a crazy action movie-style plan. Step 1, sail his ships down the river at night, tricking the French guards by actually speaking French to them. Step 2, climb a massive, super steep cliff in the pitch dark. And step 3, form those traditional battle lines right outside the city walls at dawn. Just try to imagine this totally impossible task. 4,500 British troops, completely silent, grabbing onto roots and vines just before dawn. They are physically pulling themselves and their heavy weapons up a 65-meter-high cliff in pitch-black darkness. It was wildly dangerous, but, spoiler alert, it actually worked. When the sun finally came up, the French woke up to find the British army already lined up perfectly on the plains of Abraham. Montcalm was essentially forced right out of his safe stronghold and into an open field battle. And because this was exactly the kind of European-style fighting the British were best at, the mighty stronghold of New France fell in less than 1 single hour. It was a lightning-fast, chaotic fight. And, in a massive, shocking twist, both of the commanding generals, Wolfe and Montcalm, were actually killed on the battlefield. It was such a dramatic, crazy moment that it even inspired historical cartoons later on, like this fantastic one by Kate Beaton. It shows a dying Montcalm looking pretty annoyed that Wolfe managed to die first. Part 6. What if things changed? Now, even with the capital city lost and both generals dead, our story isn't quite over yet. The French survivors didn't just give up right away. They retreated to Montreal and actually managed to hold off the British troops through a freezing, totally grueling winter. By this point, both armies were exhausted, starving, and out of supplies. They were both trapped by the frozen river, betting absolutely everything on the spring. They were basically just waiting to see whose reinforcement ships would arrive from Europe first once that river ice melted. The tension must have been unbelievable, right? Finally, the ice cleared. A ship appeared on the horizon, and the very first ship to arrive belonged to the British. With new supplies and fresh soldiers arriving for the British, the French really had no choice but to surrender. This eventually led to the Treaty of Paris in 1763, which officially handed the whole territory over to Britain. And that leaves us with this massive cliffhanger of history. The British won, sure, but what if the weather out in the Atlantic Ocean had been just slightly different? What if that very first ship sailing down the river had been flying a French flag instead of a British one? It really makes you wonder, how much of our modern world was decided simply by which boat sailed down a river first? Think about that. Until next time.